And I would like to welcome you today, everybody. Welcome to the first live event of Language Assessment Literacy EVO. And we're going to be hosting our first guest talks in series by Dina Tsagari. But before, I just want to walk you through the overview of first week. Let me share my screen. Just a second. Yeah, so I want to take you to our EVO Canvas page. Our session started off with 305 participants from all around the world, and it is supported by IETFL RESIG, IALTA classroom-based assessment, and research group ENA of OsloMed. Heartfelt thanks for their support. And of course, we are very happy because we have a great team. I want to show you the our team to you. There's Ece, you met us, and we have our guest experts, Sofia Tomais, she's with us today. Anna, also she's with us today. Antonios, thanks for joining. This is our great team, and you will be interacting with us mostly throughout these sessions. And the session started off with waiting for week, registration week. And we had a registration questionnaire to understand our participants better. Here it is. Just a gentle reminder, if you haven't filled this in, please do so. It is important for us to, respond to the expectations and your needs, your specific needs. In week one, we started our online discussions about, getting to know one another. And we talked about purposes of assessment and assessment tools. We had, ongoing conversations about purposes of assessment tasks and tools, and we focused on very important quality issues like reliability, validity, and washback. And there are some, quizzes about what we learned this week, and reflection, as well as we're trying to put together do's and don'ts kind of list to achieve reliability and validity in assessment tasks. So if you haven't been able to fulfill all of these tasks, these are waiting for you. And we were very lucky because we had great contribution from our assessment experts. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Karin Vogt and Gudrun Eriksson, because when you go through these tasks, you will be able to see beautiful videos prepared, tailored only for LAL EVO participants. Please make sure you watch them before you respond to the activities as well. And I would love to leave the floor to Ece. She's going to introduce our speaker to you. And may I remind that, can you please keep your microphones on mute during the questions? And if you have something, you can just type it in chat. We'll be monitoring it. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to direct your questions to Dina. So Ece, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aslı. And thank you very much to all our guest speakers, guest experts, participants from all over the world. I think we have 300 registered members, which is very exciting to see. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us this morning. I'd like to introduce you. She doesn't need my introduction, but Dina Tsagari is with us today, this morning. She is a professor at the Department of Primary and Secondary Teacher Education at Oslo Metropolitan University in Norway. She's also worked for the University of Cyprus, Greek Open University, and Polytechnic University of Hong Kong. Her research interests include language testing and assessment, materials design and evaluation, differentiated instruction, multilingualism, distance education, and learning difficulties. She is the editor and author of numerous books, journal papers, book chapters, project reports, etc. She coordinates research groups also, like classroom-based language assessment STIG and for IALTA, ENA for OsloMet, and she is involved in EU-funded and other research projects. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dina Tsagari.
Wow, what a warm welcome, Asli. Thank you for the hands up, and the same. It's wonderful to be here with all of you today. Fantastic group of practitioners who are so eager to learn about assessment and the intricate nature but fascinating nature of assessment. I'm so happy to be with you today. The inaugural meeting, the kickoff meeting, I suppose, even though you had a week with activities, it's now the beginning of the course. So honored to do that, and wonderful to be sharing some ideas later on through the PowerPoint slides. But hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you, and I hope you enjoy this session. And I'm more than happy to communicate with all of you in later stages of the course. Asli was a little bit eager whether I would be able to share my slides, but I hope you can see the slides now. Is it okay? Full view? Okay, great. And a little bit of a picture on top of what the country looks like, especially a snapshot from Bergen, a beautiful place to live in, but also to visit. But today's topic is titled Language Assessment Literacy for Teachers, and that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about language assessment and language assessment literacy for teachers, that is you. Just before we start talking about language assessment literacy, I'd like us to take a minute only to reflect on 3 terms that probably you're going to come across, and very much is going to, all of these terms are going to be discussed, and probably they're going to be worked on again and again, reflected upon, and definitely you're going to unpack and look at the content of each and every one of these terms: evaluation, assessment, and testing. And just to start with a reflection, what do you understand with the terms? How do you understand them? Do you think they're the same or different? Maybe perhaps we might like to take a minute for a few reflections that you might like to put in the chat. Don't be shy. This is not a test. Yeah, Nikhil, I think you're right. Definitely they're used interchangeably. And Huimai, thank you for placing them in an order of evaluation, assessment, and testing. Cordelia, thank you very much for the reflection to find out the level of instincting and ability to apply knowledge. Even though I don't understand the word instincting, probably you mean something there. Hati said that testing definitely refers to measurement of performance, and assessment is the evaluation of the measurement. That's a good perspective. Tamari, to measure is second language acquisition. Yep. Efrosini, thank you for your contribution. Testing is only one way of evaluating and assessing teaching and learning. Absolutely, Cordelia, I knew you meant something there different than the word above. Understanding, definitely. Ashley, thank you for replying to Tamari. Tamari, you've been working for USN in Norway? That's interesting. Maybe you would like to connect with Ashley. Shifa, yes, evaluation is more general term. Absolutely. Evaluation and assessment mean the same to you, Efrosini? Yeah, very much so. Definitely many more good reflections. Okay, I'm just scrolling down and I'm just only have the time to your reflections. Wonderful. Okay, now I'd like to position all of us in the general field of language assessment landscape. And I'd like to start with the word evaluation, a process that is not only happening when looking at students' performance, but also evaluation is part of ELT, English language teaching. And we do evaluate when we look at teaching materials, for example. So teaching materials could be part of our evaluation program, teachers' methodology, courses and learning curricula. So when it comes to evaluating these aspects of language teaching and learning, we tend to use the word evaluation. But when it comes to looking at students' performance, the word assessment is used more frequently. And here I picked just one of the most popular definitions that has been proposed by Black and William back in 1998, where assessment is seen to refer to those activities undertaken by teachers and or by their students, which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they're engaged. And just by looking very briefly at the reasons why we need to assess, and I'm just going to talk about them briefly now before going back to that map of language testing and assessment, just to remind us that when we assess, it's that we need to prioritize students, first of all, who need to know where they stand in relation to their learning, and because students need to become more self-aware of their abilities and skills. So students need to be seen as the most important group of stakeholders when it comes to assessment, and students are the most important recipients of assessment. So not to forget to think of students when it comes to assessment, because we do all of this for them. You see, teachers come second. Teachers, through assessment, find out about students' abilities, knowledge and skills, and they continuously feed back the results of their assessment in the teaching and learning process that aims at improvement and effectiveness. But of course, it's not all about students and teachers that we tend to assess, but also about parents, head teachers, principals, and other stakeholders who are interested in learning about the progress of the students. But I'd like to take you back to that map, the map of evaluation, assessment, and testing. So assessment, as we said before, are processes. And one way of assessing is through testing. And normally teachers tend to test through paper and pencil tests, the tests that we all design at the end of the week or at the end of the month, or at the end of the unit. And especially in high stakes exam environments, testing might look like this or even like that, especially in countries such as Korea, where the stakes are really very high for students, especially when entering university departments. But testing is not only about paper and pencil tests, it's also about computer-based and computer adaptive tests. That's the CBT and the CAT tests that normally referred to as tests that are mediated with the use of a computer. In the case of a computer-based tests, this means that all students will be taking the exact same test with the use of a computer, but a computer adaptive test is a test that adapts itself to the abilities and performance of the students. We don't have the time to go into detail there, but there are so many good examples on the internet. And of course, there's a lot of publications for both. And this is just a few examples of what computer-based testing or computer adaptive testing might mean. Of course, when it comes to computer-based testing, especially for high stakes purposes, students are invited to enter special rooms where all their belongings are kept outside the room, and they basically respond to questions on the screen using headphones and other equipment. You can see the picture on the left hand side on the top. But of course, there are all kinds of computer-based tests that are out there on the market. Just briefly to introduce you to some of them, the PDE Academic, Bulat, that's the business language testing service that is offering also the TOEFL junior test. But on the left bottom hand side, you can see a picture of Dialang. DIALANG stands for the diagnostic language testing that is freely accessible, and it assesses users' language abilities in 12 different languages. More languages are now in place, from what I know, basically giving the opportunity to users of these languages to check on their level of performance. In Norway, computer-based tests are used nationally for the 5th and the 8th grade. And here are just a few examples, starting with very low performance, where students need to map a very short text on the left with visual stimuli on the right. And basically this test starts from very low performance, moving to more demanding performance, where texts are followed by multiple choice, such as item 33 on the screen, and item 8, for example, that is for level 8, where short texts are given as options to be mapped on to visual stimuli on the left-hand side, over to item 44, the last one on the test, where students have to organize the various paragraphs of a text that is not presented in the right order. But computer-based tests and computer adaptive tests are not just in the hands of the big examination boards, such as ETS, for example, or Cambridge or Pearson, and many more of those international examination bodies. Teachers also produce their own computer-based tests using Google Forms and Kahoot, and I'm sure quite a lot of you must have done that. But assessment is not all about testing. We also do assessment through informal, continuous methods of assessment, frequently referred to as alternative methods of assessment, such as portfolios, diaries, projects. Self and peer assessment are also very important assessment processes. And these are just a few examples of teacher-based portfolios. And this is an example of the European language portfolio that some of you already know. Actually, most of the European countries have designed their own European language portfolios. This is an example of the Norwegian European language portfolio for students between the ages of 6 and 12. And what is a European language portfolio? Very briefly, to those of you who are not familiar with the ELP is basically a document in which those who are learning or have learned a language, whether at school or outside school, can record and reflect on their language learning and cultural experiences. The ELP has very strong links with the CFR. I suppose all of you are familiar or have heard the term CFR, which stands for the Common European Framework of Reference. And this is also freely accessible, and you can download it from the respective internet websites. And actually, the ELP focuses on assessment and mainly self-assessment using the CFR scales. Coming back to the map, just very briefly to list a few more alternatives in assessment. Conferences, debates, demonstrations, dramatizations, exhibitions, games, observations, projects, storytelling, think aloud are just some of the alternatives that can be used for informal assessment purposes. But assessment is not that, it's not just that. There's so much more that could be explored in the field, and so much terminology that definitely you're going to come across in the course that you're about to embark on. And these are just some of the acronyms that we tend to use, and you will definitely unpack through the course. But I just like to pick on two of those terms, summative and formative assessment. You're going to explore them in your course, but just to introduce the two terms and unpack them a little bit with you today, where formative assessment is used to refer to a range of formal and informal assessment procedures conducted by teachers during the learning process in order to motivate teaching and learning activities to improve student attainment. And it's normally and commonly contrasted with summative assessment, which seeks to monitor educational outcome, often for purposes of external accountability. And I'm going to be sharing some examples of formative and summative assessment on this graph, where we look at examples of the most formative types of assessment, of minute-to-minute classroom assessments the teachers tend to do in the classroom, over to teacher, for example, assessment developed for learning, teacher-developed quizzes and curriculum-based assessments, to grade level team-developed assessments, screening, diagnostic, ongoing monitoring assessments, to more summative examples of assessment, such as district-developed mid-year benchmark assessments, to the most summative assessment types, such as end-of-the-year exams and university entrance exams. But more and more assessment challenges are out there. If you have not been convinced so far, definitely I'm just going to summarize some of the challenges that have been posed for teachers in terms of assessment. Definitely, we need to maintain balance and respond to mandates for formative and summative assessment that have been placed by ministries of education or other educational authorities in our countries. Very often, we are required to design and administer classroom tests ourselves. We need to employ new assessment methods. I just briefly touched on self and peer assessment, portfolio assessment, and other types. We need to offer exam courses that prepare students for high stakes international tests. We need to be able to critically evaluate our assessments. We need to consider the assessment needs of minority students, such as students with special learning needs, multilingual students, and many more. And recently, we've been asked to design and implement assessments to meet the needs of students, especially during the COVID-19 period. Research has shown that teacher assessment, and especially teachers, are made accountable for their assessment practices. They experience a lot of anxiety. Most often they work on their assessments in isolation. They tend to fall back on what they experienced as students and don't feel ready to create quality assessment materials and procedures. So how can we help you? How can we help teachers? By raising levels of assessment literacy, a term that has been coined by Stiggins back in 1991 to mean the ability to understand, analyze, and apply information on student performance to improve instruction. In Barluri in 2008 has also proposed another definition, that of looking at language assessment literacy as having the capacity to ask and answer critical questions about the purpose for assessment, about the fitness of the tools being used, and about what is going to happen on the basis of the assessment results. And finally, with Karin, we proposed another definition of language assessment literacy as the ability to design, develop, and critically evaluate tests and other assessment procedures, as well as the ability to monitor, evaluate, grade, and score assessments on the basis of theoretical knowledge. How far have we been in terms of research? I think the field has done an amazing amount of work by conceptualizing and defining language assessment literacy, by researching language assessment literacy with teachers, and these are just some references here, and also looking at the language assessment literacy of other stakeholders, such as textbook writers, teacher educators, and policymakers. The field has also looked at language assessment literacy by implementing assessment reforms. Most well known is the reform that has been undertaken in Hong Kong, for example, and Liz Ham-Lyons in 2016 has reported in very detailed way. Actual assessment practices by teachers have been the focus of research, and these are just a few references of the work that has been done by using exciting methodologies all the way from asking teachers to report to questionnaires, to observing teachers when assessing students by looking at teacher assessment samples, by looking at assessment protocols and official curricula documents as well. These are just a few examples of the work that we have been doing in terms of assessment literacy. Some of the publications have seen the light of publication in Language Assessment Quarterly. We have published books on language assessment literacy, such as Language Assessment Literacy from Theory to Practice. With colleagues as well, we worked on a variety of very important chapters, theorizing, producing state-of-the-art papers. Other types of research that we conducted at a European level has also been published with colleagues in very important journals. And recently, work we've done in Norway by looking at conceptions of language assessment literacy of teacher educators. Of course, as I said earlier, there's been an impressive amount of research that has produced models of language assessment literacy from the field of teacher education. Shu and Brown in 2016 have produced the so-called conceptual framework of teacher assessment literacy in practice, where assessment literacy and teacher assessment literacy is broken down into various constituents, such as the knowledge base the teachers need to have of assessment, the interpretative and guiding framework. Teacher conceptions of assessment are also very important in this model, but equally important are the macro-social, cultural, micro-social, institutional contexts, teacher assessment literacy in practice, teacher learning, and assessor identity and construction in understanding teacher assessment literacy. The field of language assessment has produced very important models, such as the one produced by Glenn Fulcher in 2012, and of course the very well-known spider diagrams by Taylor, who profiled 4 different types of stakeholders: test writers, classroom teachers, university administrators, and professional language testers in terms of the dimensions of language assessment literacy that they need to possess. But I'm just going to focus on teacher assessment literacy conceptions by Taylor, who proposes that teachers need to have, for example, technical skills, principles and concepts, language pedagogy, sociocultural values, local practices, awareness, personal beliefs, scores and decision making, as well as knowledge of theory at different levels, but they all comprise a profile of an assessment literate teacher of the 21st century. Other researchers in the field have proposed their own spider webs of language assessment literacy with new dimensions, such as Baker and Richards in 2018, who see that decision-making, collaboration, and task performance are equally important aspects of language assessment literacy. Kreml and Harding in 2020 also added washback and preparation, as well as language structure use and development as other important areas of language assessment literacy. In our line of research with Henrik Byrne, we have also proposed collaboration competence, disciplinary competence, as well as metacognitive skills as being important aspects and dimensions of language assessment literacy for teachers. I don't want to bore you anymore with language assessment research, because what most of you will be doing from now on, especially in the course, are more hands-on practice. But I'd like to conclude this part of the discussion today by saying that the lessons we learned so far from research is that language assessment literacy is a multi-layered, multifaceted developing construct. It's an important aspect of professionalism among teachers, And congratulations to all of you for joining this course. As I just said, an important aspect of professionalizing the field is participating in seminars, and language assessment literacy is a very important area. Language assessment literacy also fosters teachers' empowerment and autonomy, and the different stakeholders have different needs and interests and expectations in language assessment development. And I'm sure that your tutors on this course will definitely address your different needs, interests, and expectations. And how do we deal, how do we address, how do we meet the needs of teachers who are willing to become more assessment literate? Of course, through training. And as I said many times today, congratulations on taking part in this exciting course that is led by Asle and Etche. And you're going to be working with fantastic tutors on the course. Sophia, Thomi, Anna, and Antonis will be there to support you. So good luck for taking part in the course. I'm sure you're going to be learning amazing things about assessment, and definitely you're going to be exploring an amazing world. The course is offered on Canvas, but I'm not going to say much because your tutors will be taking this on with you. But I'd like to introduce you to some other resources that perhaps you might like to look at while you're undertaking the course or afterwards. And another exciting course that we produced at the end of 2018 is the Teachers Assessment Literacy Enhancement EU-funded project, referred to as the TAIL Erasmus project. This is who we were, a range of people. You're going to be working with one of them in your course, Professor Karin Vogt from the University of Education in Heidelberg, and a lot more good people who have taken part in producing an exciting website. This is a screenshot of the website, and here's the link on the top right-hand side of the online course that is freely accessible, and you can learn more about language assessment, on how to assess language skills, but also how to provide feedback, alternatives in assessment, and how to deal with test impact. The program has also produced a handbook of assessment for language teachers, and some of the ideas from that resource will be used in your course as well. Another exciting EU-funded project has, within the auspices of the ENRICH project, referred to as English as a Lingua Franca Practices for Inclusive Multilingual Classrooms, has also produced an exciting range of courses. One of them is language assessment within multilingual environments. And the course has recently become freely accessible to the public, and you can learn more about language assessment in multilingual environments by following the PowerPoint presentation, where voiceover is used in the activities that are produced for this module. The course also produced a new handbook, and you're more than welcome to use the materials. Those of you who are dealing with students with dyslexia, there's also another exciting resource that is freely accessible, and that's Dyslexia for Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, that has produced another online course, also freely accessible, with a Unit 10, specially dedicated to the assessment of language learners with dyslexia, and a handbook that is also freely accessible. The British Council has also created a resource on how language assessment works that you can learn more about through animated assessment videos and a glossary. Some of these videos will be used in your course as well. Trinity College London has created a series of interviews with very important scholars in the field who are giving answers to very basic and substantial questions. And this is the resource the British Council has produced with regard to the glossary that I mentioned earlier. Other websites, such as the Language Testing Resources website, created by Professor Glenn Fulcher, will, of course, expand your horizons should you visit the website that is providing very important information and also very useful resources in the field. Other types of activities and projects, such as mediation in teaching, learning, and assessment, a new project will be providing access to its materials very briefly and providing a lot of good materials, hands-on practice, very practical examples on how to mediate through assessment and support language learning and teaching. Professional associations such as the European Association for Language Testing and Assessment, through its resources, is also another way of expanding on your understanding of language assessment and testing. The very many SIGs that we are coordinating are producing exciting programs prior to the conference every spring. Next year, the conference will take place at the end of May, beginning of June, where SIGs will be offering very interesting programs. Other professional organizations such as ITEFL, through their webinars and through their publications, are offering equally important opportunities to know about testing, evaluation, and assessment. Professional organizations other than ELTA, such as LTRC, through their own SIGs, and you can see on the right-hand side, SIGs such as automated language assessment, a language assessment literacy SIG, a SIG on aviation testing, a SIG on language assessment for young learners, test taker insights in language assessment, and many more are professional communities that you can participate in and, of course, meet and discuss issues around those important topics. Back in 2017, there was a conference that was exclusively dedicated on language assessment literacy across stakeholder boundaries in Bogota, Colombia, with very important plenary presentations, workshops, and paper presentations as well. Back in Europe with ALTE, who's also giving the opportunity for more collaboration among its members through very important SIG groups, such as the CFR SIG group, the Language for Specific Purposes, SIGs on Technology, and many more. Other types of associations, such as the AEA Association for Educational Assessment, with its e-assessment, assessment cultures, and inclusive assessment SIGs, are also important places, important groups that you can become part of. Also, universities are collaborating with centers of excellence, such as the ECML Center in Graz, where Oslo Met, my own university, has collaborated back in 2019, offering a week-long training to teachers who were interested in innovative methodologies and assessment in language learning. But other types of training and other types of opportunities to enhance your levels of language assessment literacy are offered by professional associations such as Cambridge Assessment English, who are also providers of assessment. Cambridge Assessment is offering webinars for teachers, and so does Pearson as well, that are offering a webinar series with exciting topics. But of course, I have to say, and going back to the basics, that there's so many interesting handbooks out there that you can turn to for inspiration and support in your practice. But I'd like to finish today's presentation with a very important point that I always make at the end of my presentations. And this has to do with socializing and communities of practice in language assessment. It's very important to become part of the SIGs that I mentioned earlier, but also become part of research groups. And here I'm presenting our own evaluation and assessment research group that focuses on themes related to evaluations of subject didactics, teacher education, teaching methods and materials, assessment and testing in subject learning, assessment of impact, feedback, and assessment methods and paradigms. We are getting close to having 60 members and working on 5 projects for the time being. And almost every Wednesday of every month we meet and people are given opportunities to present their work and receive feedback from the members of the group. But very importantly, to raise the levels of language assessment literacy for teachers especially, is to offer more language testing and assessment courses at university level, but also as a pre and in-service level programs offered by educational authorities and ministries as well. But most importantly, and not to forget that, is to become members of teacher assessment teams, groups, or even work in pairs to share your concerns over your assessment projects and to work on collaborative assessment projects through action research. So very importantly, one lesson to learn from today's presentation: be part of professional communities, be part of communities of practice that you can create in your own institutions, in your own schools. And do disseminate your findings, do disseminate your projects through teachers' presentations and conferences. Very important to do so nowadays, and through teacher publications. And the field has so many good language newsletters and good language journals for teachers where you can share your own work in the field of language assessment. And finally, doing more research will benefit the field. So I'd like to encourage you in your undergraduate, postgraduate studies, or even for your doctoral dissertations, to focus more on aspects of language assessment and language assessment literacy, because the field needs more work coming from all of you. Thank you for listening. I hope that I'm on time. Yes, I am, with a few minutes for discussion.
Yes, you are. Dina, you are perfectly on time. Thank you very much. I again would like to say, wow, as usual, you've taken us from the very basic, the difference between the terminologies, to basically everything about language assessment. Thank you very much for this fast and very informative journey. We have certain questions, but first things first, the participants are asking for the PowerPoint slides. If you could share your slides with us, we can also upload them maybe to our Canvas.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I suppose that you can upload a copy of that on the website of the course somewhere.
Of course, exactly. Okay. Any other questions? I'm just scanning the chat box. There was a discussion about the digitalization of assessment, and I remember a question asking for what the experts think about the application of assessments into digital practices. There have been some comments, and Dina, maybe we can also ask what your take on it is.
I need to scroll up and down, so if you could just read the comments around that discussion, that would be more helpful, I think.
Sure.
In the meantime, if you have questions for Dina, you can just unmute yourself or raise your hand, and we'll see you and your question. You can ask your questions. The resources, the chat box summary, and the presentation video presentations will be uploaded on the Canvas. No worries.
Any questions, comments for our presenter, Dina Tsagari?
Either it was informative or it was overwhelming.
Well, I think some I think Frosini asked about the digital assessment. I would like to, Dina, tell us how does she sees all these procedures with digital assessment that has been imposed during the COVID period, the pandemic, and if something has changed in the field.
Yeah.
Think about something else, something different.
Yes, I mean, it was stressful and shocking for a lot of teachers having to turn from paper and pencil into online digitalized types of assessment. But despite the stress of at least the initial phase of COVID, a lot of teachers have resorted to a lot of informal types of assessment, which is very good for the field, I must say, and also to new and exciting types of feedback. So in a study that we conducted last year, and we're continuing to collect data, we've seen that teachers are responding to students' work through projects. For example, they engage students a lot in working collaboratively with other students, working on projects, keeping online digital portfolios, taking part in online assessments. But the level of feedback that the students receive is really impressive. Teachers have turned into providing not just qualitative, constructive feedback, not only in the form of grades or letter grades, but text that teachers produce on the basis of criteria, on the basis of scales, taking into account students' examples in their feedback, but also feedback that is produced orally by teachers, that is recorded by teachers and sent back to the students in a form of an audio file, for example. And I'd like to say that we are moving more into formative types of assessment, which was not the case before. And I'm super excited to see what other types of assessment teachers can afford to explore. The idea is not to push teachers more into digital assessments that they don't feel familiar with, but only to those they feel familiar with, and of course, those types of assessment that they can afford and accommodate within their contexts and within, of course, the reasonable structure and support that they have in their workplaces.
And there's a very interesting question in the chat. It reads, do you think digital assessment needs a different type of assessment literacy?
Yes and no. One needs to know the basics of assessment literacy before moving to digital assessment literacy. Digital assessment literacy needs, of course, its own type of assessment literacy. It's not the same thing as paper and pencil or physically, where candidates are physically present. Absolutely, I agree with the question. It does. Because you need to know what it is that digital assessments do, especially when it comes to assessing specific constructs. The constructs change, they're not the same. The types of tasks that we need to design when it comes to digital assessment are different. So one needs to keep an eye on that, and of course, understand the validity and reliability of the tasks that we design for digital assessment.
Cordelia has another question. How does the summative formative assessment spectrum change with the advent of online testing?
As I said before, it seems that teachers are moving more and more into formative assessment for their classroom-based purposes. But what gets to be strengthened more and more with the support of technology is also summative assessment. So it seems that the advent of online support and technology is only benefiting both summative and formative assessment.
And Cordelia is also asking if these principles are also applicable to the fields like management, the principles of assessment, I think she's referring to.
Can you ask the question again?
Yes, are the principles also applicable to the fields, to the other fields like management?
Yeah, the basic components, the basic principles that you're going to be working on, for example, validity, reliability definitely are applicable to other fields.
Okay. Then I don't see any other questions coming. Do you? If I'm missing anything, please let me know. Okay.
And I think Dina's comment about community of practices is very important. In our group this year, we're also hopefully going to, evolve into a online learning, professional learning community. And we're so looking forward to learning with and from you. And I have a question for the audience. Do you think that it would be possible in your local context, to organize, to have a sharing kind of community about the assessment? Because when there was this sudden shift to online assessment, we found ourselves asking each other, what are you doing? What is working, etc. In your opinion, is that possible in your context? If it is possible, can you put a thumbs up, maybe, Aike, from the reactions by using the reaction? Yeah, so Tamari, in your context, I see it is possible. Yeah, in a Greek context, it is also possible, I guess. I see Tomais and Antonios. And it will be possible for us as well, hopefully, in week 5. We're going to ask our participants to share the assessment tasks that they're going to develop throughout the course. So we're so looking forward to those as well. I just wanted to remind you of those. Thank you. So do we have any final questions, comments?
Yes, I think there is one. Okay, let's see.
Tamari, I think you had a hand up, isn't it, Tamari?
Yes, if it's possible for me to comment, yeah. Actually, it's a great honor for me to be attending this massive online open course, especially it's related to the fact that recently during pandemic, I initiated a kind of like a small research, like a paper together with my Turkish colleagues and Kazakhstani colleagues about digitally assisted assessment. And of course, when we started to cope with this like a quite interesting topic, because it at the same time was a headache for us. As we had to actually start integrating into our ESP classrooms without any prior training. And that's why we were, thanks to this lots of training, CPD events, and of course ITEFL also provided lots of opportunities, and not only ITEFL, all international organizations, we were discovering this digital assessment, so digitally, so like a digital assessment tools, but at the same time we tried with our small qualitative survey 2 questions. So colleagues of ours in Turkey, at the same time Georgia in my country and Kazakhstan, how did they find this? And of course a lot of challenges and a lot of like problems were identified. That's why I decided to to get enrolled in this MOOC in order to find out more, at the same time to be shared with such kind of expertise. And thank you very much for this great initiative, at the same time of with like a kind of not only synchronous event, it's a synchronous platforms. That's why I think it will be more food for thought, and of course more opportunity for us to be developing our like this research interest, which is in my case like a new research interest for me. That's why I wanted to comment from this viewpoint. So I will be doing my best.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us.
Yes. Thanks for joining us. There's a very interesting question here. I'd like to read that one too. Dr. Mina Harun asks, I have 2 questions. How do teachers attend to the student reflections of the assessment? I believe she is referring to the reactions to scores. Do teachers redo the assessment? Or do they use the feedback to fine-tune the assessment for future students? Should we do or ask for the students' feedback at all? Thank you so much, Shisa. What do you all think about it? So if the students complain, Dr. Mina, please correct me if I'm not getting your question right, but what I get, if the students complain about the results or the content of the exam, what should we do? This is the bottom line of the question, I believe, right? Any comments?
Can I just come in with a quick answer? The answer to all these questions is yes, yes, and yes. But I think Mina is also referring to the quality of the assessment as well, in terms of the difficulty of the questions, or how maybe perhaps the well-being of the students in terms of taking part in an assessment. So I think she's asking about other aspects, not just the results. And I think that these are very important aspects, and definitely fine-tuning the assessment for future students and learning from the experience is the way to go, because there's no such thing as a perfect assessment activity or assessment process. Assessments are only validated by asking students to take the assessment, and if there are complaints by students or responses or reactions to any type of assessment, it means that we need to revisit our assessments and work together with others to improve them. Not to take it personally, this is very important, because we're all trying to do our best, and assessments sometimes need more time, more thinking. Maybe perhaps they need a second round of evaluation and reflection before we can say with any degree of certainty that our assessments are good assessments. Good meaning that they are taken on positively by the students. Students see the value of the assessment and they accept the evaluation as well. So work together, it's very important. Don't be afraid to share your assessment babies with others. Don't keep the assessments only to yourselves. Work in communities of practice, share, exchange, and don't be afraid to use other people's assessment as well. That's my advice. Thank you.
Let's not put any other words over this, and let's conclude this session with this powerful message from Dina Tsagari. Thank you very much, dear Dina, for being with us, for sharing your expertise, for your knowledge with us, and all the participants, all the guest experts, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. Just a couple of reminders before we conclude. Week 2 is coming. Week 1 is not finished yet, but there are still many tasks to complete there. Please don't forget to fill in the questionnaire. If you haven't done so, there are some course expectations we still would like to hear from you. Visit those pages and then you can complete these tasks. A reminder, you cannot unlock the tasks for week 2 unless you go over the tasks of week 1. So if you see the message, if you want to see the content of week 2 on Canvas platform, and if you see the message, this is not unlocked right now, we will be unlocking it on Sunday night, I think, and Monday, for Monday, everyone, it should be unlocked. But on Monday, if you still cannot see the content for week 2, it means you are missing some tasks for the previous week, and the same fashion will repeat for all the weeks. And for week 2, we'll be focusing on the receptive skills of language. We'll be talking about listening, assessment of reading, and certain principles to them, as well as the digital tools that we can include in our assessment now. We'll have another guest speaker, Aylin Inaldı, will be with us. And I think that's all. Am I missing anything, Aslı?
No. Thank you so very much, everybody, for joining us today. Please don't be shy. Feel free to post and comment. We crossed roads, and we will together. We are hoping that you will be a very interactive and constructive group of teachers. Therefore, please respond to one another. Don't feel shy, and try to catch up with the loaded weeks. We know that there might be, a little bit too much, but we are inspired, because of your motivation to learn more, and we will be there to support you. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Dina. Heartfelt thanks. And bye-bye, everyone. Take care.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.